Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albenese was re-elected in the early hours this morning, defying the odds of last year's incumbency curse in a landslide victory. The final votes are still being counted, but the country's center-left government is set to dramatically increase its majority. It may be thousands of miles away, but Trump and his policies did loom over that election. And CNN's Harry Enton is here to run the numbers on this. Hello, Harry. Nice to see you. Just how much of a comeback was this for Australia's Labor Party?
Yeah, it's a tremendous comeback. I think that's the only way you can use it. That's a statistical term for you. Tremendous. Huge, as perhaps the President of the United States might say. Take a look here. The chance that Australia's Labor Party wins a majority in the 2025 election. You go back to February, before the tariff war. Look at this. It was just a 3% chance. Just a 3% chance. And as we know, well, now it's a 100% chance that they win the majority. And not just that, they expanded the majority. Back in February, indeed, it was most likely going to be a hung parliament where the Conservative coalition was likely to get the most number of seats in that parliament. But at the end of the day, in the lower house, Labor crushes with an expanded majority. Anthony Albanese, the prime minister, elected to another term.
That is wild to go from 3% to winning.
Yes.
How much of this could be attributed to the Trump factor?
Yeah, I mean, look, we mentioned the 3% pre-tariff war, but we can dig into the data a little bit more. That's what I like to do, Jessica Dean. I like to dig into the data a little bit more. That's why you have me on. It's not just because of my good looks. All right, Australians who say Trump's election was bad for Australia. Look at this. When Trump was elected back in November of 2024, it was 40%. Look at where it was right at the end of the campaign. 68%, two-thirds of Australians said that Trump's election in the United States was bad for Australia. Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party, of course, the leftist part of that country, they hammered the Conservative coalition over Donald Trump. And not only at the end of the day did the Labor Party win, and not only did they get a majority, they expanded their majority, but also the head of the Conservative coalition actually lost his seat. That is how big this labor movement was, and it was supercharged by Donald John Trump. Australia, no bueno on Donald Trump, as these numbers indicate, and the election results from Australia indicate, Jessica.
So we have this outcome, and also earlier this week we saw another big comeback for a center-left party.
You got that right. Just north of the border in Canada, right? We were talking about it last weekend. I mean, look here. Canada's Liberal Party wins the most seats in the 2025 election. On January 19th, just before inauguration in the States, it was less than 1%. Hello. Well, that April 28th result, 100% chance, of course, now that the Liberal Party up in Canada was able to maintain its place as the largest party in Canada's parliament. Again, you don't have to be a mathematical genius to see less than 1% jumping to 100% just before Trump's inauguration. Now, something very much clearly happened in Canada, and I wonder what it could be, Jessica Dean.
It sure did. So how much was that because of Trump? What does the data say?
Yeah, so what does the data say? So we have the odds jumping here. But of course, as I said earlier on in this segment, I like to dig on into the data. Well, get this. Why did Canadians switch their votes to Liberal? Well, 48% of those who switched their votes said a top reason was Donald John Trump. So it is not just way out there in the east or west, depending on which direction you want to go, and down in Australia, but it was just north of the border as well, where Donald Trump supercharged the center-left in that country and turned what looked like was going to be a loser for the center-left party, and all of a sudden made him a winner.
Wow. And Australia and Canada are not the only places where left-leaning parties are benefiting from this reaction to Trump.
No, it isn't. So we're talking north of the border. How about we go south of the border? I've always been a fan of the great country of Mexico. So Mexico's president's net approval rating, Claudia Sheinbaum, I mean, hello, look at this. Her net approval rating up 22 points since November. Of course, she's been one of the main opponents of Donald Trump. Her overall approval rating now in Mexico, get this, is north of 80%. When was the last time there was any national politician in the United States who had an approval rating north of 80%? I think you have to go all the way back to George W. Bush at the beginning of this century after 9/11. The bottom line is whether you look in Australia, Canada, or Mexico, the center-left or the left competitors to those right parties, the opposition to Donald Trump, the opposition to the conservatives, I have said, have been supercharged by Donald Trump being the president of the United States, and his tariff wars have absolutely caused conservative parties worldwide to see massive recessions in terms of their popularity in those different countries.
It is truly fascinating to see it all laid out, with the data like this. Would you say then that this is a global backlash to the United States under Trump?
I would say so. I mean, we mentioned the 3 countries already, but let's expand. Instead of 3 countries, why don't we talk about 29 different countries, okay? 29 is a bigger number than 3. Say the U.S. will have a positive impact on world affairs. This is April versus pre-2024 election. Look at the number of countries in which that percentage has declined, the percentage who say the U.S. will have a positive impact on world affairs. It has declined, and get this, 26 out of 29 countries, nearly unanimous. It doesn't basically matter where you go. Yeah, there's maybe a country here or there that like the United States better, but the vast majority of countries that are polled hold a lesser view of the United States now versus before Donald Trump was elected. The bottom line is, as I said earlier, this has caused liberal leftist parties worldwide a massive upswing in their popularity, and has caused a downgrading in the minds of many different folks throughout the globe, perhaps not in the United States, however, but many folks throughout the globe, to see the United States as a lesser than they did before Trump was elected. The bottom line is Donald Trump hasn't just shaped the politics in the United States, he has shaped it worldwide, oftentimes to the detriment of conservative parties and to the benefit of leftist parties worldwide, Jessica.
Harry Enton, good to see you. Thanks for walking us through all of that.
My pleasure. Nice seeing you.
And joining us now is Australian journalist Peter Harcher. He's the political editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. Peter, good morning to you where you are, and good evening from here in the U.S. Thanks so much for being here with us. I do want to play a moment from Albenese's victory speech last night and then get your reaction on the other side. Let's listen.
In this time of global uncertainty, Australians have chosen optimism and determination. Australians have chosen to face global challenges the Australian way, looking after each other while building for the future.
We heard him there mention a time of global uncertainty. He talked about looking after each other, building for the future. How much of a factor was Trump in this election?
Jessica, Trump was a huge factor in this election. He dominated the news cycle before the campaign, during the campaign. He has been looming over this election like a tangerine titan, and the influence has been increasingly negative for the Conservative Party, increasingly positive for the Labor Party, which has, as we just saw, now reclaimed power for a second consecutive term. Now, that's a transformation from the picture of a couple of months ago. In fact, the moment Trump was inaugurated, there was a drift away from the Conservative Party here, because it looked as if, at that point, the Conservative Party was going to take power from the Labor Party, the centre-left party. But the drift began back to Labor just after Trump was inaugurated. But then the drift became an absolute stampede the moment those so-called Liberation Day tariffs were announced. That was a real shock, and Australians have been profoundly unsettled by Trump.
It's so rare to see something swing like that in politics, that in such a dramatic way. Were you surprised as someone who's covered this for years?
Yes, the polls did capture the change, but not the extent of it. And it's very rare for an incumbent government to get an increased majority at an election, but that's exactly what happened. One really interesting factor that we can quantify here, Jessica, is that the percentage of Australians telling pollsters that they think Donald Trump is, quote, bad for Australia is 68%. So 7 out of 10 Australians think that Donald Trump is bad for Australia. But Australians distinguish between Trump and America. And the percentage of Australians saying that they support the alliance, the Australia-US alliance, remains very high, like around 80%. So there's a clear distinction. Australians are still putting some hope in America and in the alliance, but are profoundly disturbed and upset and worried about Donald Trump. America is now seen as hostile to its allies, disruptive to the world economy, a source of disturbance and potential threat, rather than the reassurance it's always been. And yet Australians are still holding out hope that maybe on the other side of Trump, we're going to get America back again.